My name is Kate Waldera, and I'm Head of Information Services here at the Bismarck Public Library. And I've been with the library for 32 years. So I've seen a lot of changes, and writing this history was really a labor of love, as I said in the booklet, that I hope everyone picks up and takes a copy with. It's just been a joy to write the history and to be a part of it as well. We could not talk about our library history without first mentioning Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland in 1835, and his family immigrated to the United States in 1848, and they settled in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, which is in the Pittsburgh area. He started working as a bobbin boy in cotton factories, stoking boilers. He worked very, very hard. The money was needed in his family. And in 1850, he got employment as a telegraph messenger, and he said that that was some of the happiest days. And it was very important for him, too. He got to know his customers so well that when he would be out delivering telegrams, if he saw them on the street, he'd just hand them the telegram without having to go to their offices. So not only did he have a sharp mind, but he knew that kind of personalized service was what people really, really liked. He was very grateful for the generosity of a man by the name of Colonel James Anderson. And the reason for that is that Anderson opened up his own personal library to young boys. And the rule was that they could come on Saturdays and take a book, and then the next Saturday bring it back and take another book. And he worked so many long hours as a messenger boy that there wasn't a lot of time for reading, or even more importantly, money to buy the books. So Anderson just opened up a world of knowledge and literature to young Carnegie. And that is a very big reason why his philanthropy toward libraries, basically that's how it got started, was with that. The first Carnegie Library that he ever erected was in his home, or in his birthplace in Dunfermline, Scotland. And technically, when he was first endowing libraries, he endowed libraries in areas where he had some type of a personal connection. So obviously his birthplace was a good place for the first one to be. And then around 1899, he started expanding his funding to other areas, outside of those areas. So now you'll find Carnegie libraries in Australia, United Kingdom, and in Canada as well, though most of them seem to be in the Ontario province. Does anyone know the only 2 states without a Carnegie library?
Alaska.
Yeah, Alaska is one, and what's the other one?
Hawaii.
Nope. Delaware. Delaware and Alaska are the only 2 states without a Carnegie building in their state. And most of the endowments went to public libraries, some were to academic libraries, and about 1,500 of the original buildings still exist, and 900 are still used as libraries. Others have just been repurposed. And so the first Carnegie Library that he built in the United States, again, was in Allegheny City. That was his adopted home. And he gave a total of 1,419 grants, totaling $41 million. If we kind of looked at that amount today, it would be in the billions. So he was very, very generous with his money. And in U.S. and Puerto Rico alone, he built 1,689 libraries. Now, North Dakota was blessed with 11 Carnegie libraries, 3 of which were on academic campuses. Of course, Bismarck. And then we had Devils Lake, Dickinson, Fargo, Grafton, Grand Forks, Minot, and Valley City. The Bismarck, Fargo, and Grand Forks buildings were demolished. And Devil's Lake and Minot they're still standing, but they serve other purposes. And in the academic arena, Fargo College had a Carnegie library, and that college closed in 1922, and that library was demolished in the mid-60s. And then the NDSU and UND Carnegie buildings serve other purposes. They're no longer libraries, but they do serve other purposes on campus. And the pictures that I have, this one is the monument honoring Colonel Anderson, and I believe that is in front of the Carnegie Library that's in Allegheny City. And the other building, I believe here, is the building in I always have a hard time with that name, Dunfermline, Scotland.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
With Carnegie Libraries, did he do all of the architecture?
No, usually what the library had to do were the people that wanted the monies. They had to ensure that there was land, that there would be financial support for that library, and they also had, once the building was built, it had to be used for a library. They couldn't just turn around and use it for something else.
So was it a Bismarck architect?
The architect was from Grand Forks, but he did later have offices in Bismarck. Okay, getting back to Bismarck, in our pioneer days, the pioneer women did set up a reading room soon after the city was established. Linda Slaughter founded a school called the Sabbath School, and H.M. White was the librarian, and they had gotten approximately 200 volumes, many of which were donated by a Third Presbyterian Sabbath School out of Philadelphia. But what was really fun is that after school hours, the room would be available to the public. So in my mind, that's probably where the reference to a frontier reading room came from. So clear back in 1873, they were already trying to have a little library. And it's also believed, too, in some of the articles that I researched, that the first movement for a Carnegie Library began as soon as 1893. And according to what I saw, the citizens approved the idea, and the Carnegie Foundation seemed willing to fund the project. But the panic of 1893 hit the country, and basically the library was put on the back burner. And then Mayor Register and Governor Hanna launched other efforts to get a library in our area. Now, the Bismarck Commercial Club was one of the leaders in the whole library arena, and their organization, which is now known as the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber of Commerce, they were formed in December of 1905, and they were located in several locations, or they had headquarters in several locations. Their very first office, this building right here was, I believe, on the second floor possibly, but the whole building could have been their headquarters. Now, does that look like anything that we still have on Main Avenue? Yep, it was the Capitol Theater, and now it's Dakota Stage's headquarters. So that would have been the first location for the Chamber's offices. Another location was the Rood Building on 3rd Street, which was right by the Masonic Temple, and both buildings I don't believe are standing any longer. And then the movement for a more formal lending library started in 1913, and the ladies' groups got together. Fortnightly Club, Monday Club, Current Events, and the Bismarck Civic Improvement League all met in the home of Mrs. Oscar Will. And that effort by the ladies' groups was heartily endorsed by the commercial club. In fact, they had sent a resolution to the city commissioners a little over a year before. And the resolution asked that a free public library be established in the city, and that they had use rooms in the new auditorium that was being built. Well, apparently, I don't think the auditorium location worked out. So we don't hear anything more really about that. And so again, the Commercial Club and the Civic League got together again in 1915, and there they figured out a location to have the reading room. And the Commercial Club was most generous. They donated space on their second floor headquarters. Civic-minded people lent their time, their vehicles, their labor, their materials to do some basic remodeling of that area and build shelves. And then the citizens were given notice by the ladies' groups to donate books. And according to the paper, it said, works of standard fiction, history, travel, exploration, adventure, scientific, philosophical, theological, and sociological works, good literature of any kind, of any date, and any binding will be gladly accepted. So pretty much everything. Just give it to me. And the city's citizens did come through very well. And then moving a little bit further down the line, in the middle of the reading room being set up and donations arriving, Mayor Lucas received a letter from James Bertram, who was the secretary of the Carnegie Corporation. And he said, "My dear sir, responding to your communications on behalf of Bismarck, North Dakota, if the city agrees by resolution of the Board of City Commissioners to maintain a free public library at a cost of $2,500 a year and provides a suitable site for the Carnegie Corporation of New York, we'll be happy to give the $2,500 to erect a free library building in Bismarck, North Dakota." And so when they had their meeting a couple of days later, the City Commission authorized a special election, which I assume was because city funds were now going to be involved, at least in the budget end of it, so that had to be approved. So he called for a special election on February 28th, and 444 votes were cast, and only 70 said no, they did not want a library. And most of the opposition to the vote happened in the 4th Ward, which was located south of the tracks. And according to the Bismarck Daily Tribune article, the opposition in that ward ghosted voters, which I am thinking means they went in and said they were someone they weren't. I'm not quite sure what ghosting meant, but that sounds about right. And then supporters realized what was happening and rallied and drove people to the ballot boxes so they could cast their vote. And they won the day. And then going back to the reading room, by now it was ready for a wonderful grand opening, and that was held February 24th. And they already had over 1,600 books on the shelf, and more were waiting to be made ready to put out. And everyone felt that the creation of a reading room was a real monument to how much the city citizens had pulled together to make it a reality. And Clyde L. Young was president of the Commercial Club at that time, and in his address he stressed, that this reading room was a wonderful thing, but the rooms were not meant to be a permanent location, that we still must keep up the hard work corresponding with the Carnegie Corporation to ensure that we get the money for the building. And about 400 to 500 people attended, according to that Bismarck Tribune article, so that was quite a turnout. And then W.C. Gilbreth, which I believe he'd been a past agricultural commissioner, he placed $2,200 in an escrow account at the First National Bank, and so that provided some immediate monies to expand their collection, buy books, magazines, and things like that. So that was a windfall for them at that time as well. And just how popular was the reading room? March statistics for just the next month. They loaned 863 books. Most of those were children's fiction, and they had 317 people on file as borrowers. And it turned out that they really needed children's books, with all the children, the children making up the majority of the checkouts. The supply, or the demand, far out exceeded the supply that they had, so they put out a call, please, we need more children's books. And that's a happy problem to have. And Clyde L. Young continued the correspondence with the Carnegie Corporation, and the Board of Education appointed members for the first library board, and that was in April of 1916. Colonel C.B. Little was chosen to be president, and Clyde L. Young was secretary. And then Mrs. Agatha Patterson, Otto Holta, and George F. Will were the other members. And by law, one member had to be a member of the school board, and I believe at this time it would have been George Will. And one had to be a woman. And Little was a businessman, a lawyer, a banker, and he was a political figure. He helped to establish the Provident Life Insurance Company, and he served as its president for a number of years. And then Clyde L. Young was a lawyer and an assistant attorney general and a city attorney as well. Otto Holta immigrated from Norway, came to us through Minnesota, and he was a businessman and had been a school board member as well. And then George F. Will, we all know the Will family, the first nursery in the state of North Dakota. He went to Harvard, came back, and he worked with his father in the business. And then Mrs. Patterson, she had been the city postmaster from 1896 to 1915. And she was very active in civic and social circles and quietly worked in charity work. One thing she was noted for was nursing people and taking them into her home and helping them out during the Panic of 1893. And she did that all just very quietly without a lot of accolades. And this board stayed in place for quite a number of years. In fact, it was in place until November of 1923 when Mrs. Patterson passed away. And then George F. Register was appointed to her spot on the board. And here, okay, where did Mr. Little go? Well, anyway, Clyde L. Young, known as the father of the Bismarck Public Library, kind of an informal title, because both as a library board member and as a commercial club member, he was so instrumental in handling a lot of the work that went into getting the Carnegie Corporation to give us the money. And then, of course, Agatha Patterson and Otto Holta, and then George F. Will. I have to find out where he went. And then other board members, too, in the early years included Russell Reed and Clarion Larson, William R. Pierce, William S. Murray, Harlan Erskine, and Mrs. Herbert G. Officer. So those were all members of the library board during those times. Okay, the next thing they had, if they were going to get this money for the library, they needed to have an architect to come up with plans. And so Frederick W. Keith of Grand Forks was hired. And he had a lot of credentials building or designing buildings in the state locally. Or in conjunction with his partner, William Kirky, they designed the Henry Steele Home, which is on West Avenue B, and then the Liberty Memorial Building as well. So he had a reputation. He was well known in the area for his drawings and buildings. Now the next problem was to find a spot for the library, and the real estate was expensive. But luckily, in May of 1917, the city donated some property on that famous southwest corner of 6th Street in Thayer. And then Clyde L. Young and Commissioner Beatty managed to convince the city to make sure that they had an annual budget to run the library. And that, the newspaper article said $3,500, which I'm thinking is probably accurate. I'm thinking the Carnegie Corporation must have stated it had to be a minimum of, and the newspaper article said 35. But either way, they got the city to give them the money for that annual budget. And a lot of back and forth with the plans. You know, Carnegie said, oh, they don't like these, so then Keith would have to redo them, and then they'd have to send them back. Finally, they were approved. And then the money, the $25,000, was awarded for the building. And then they moved right along, didn't waste any time. They got the contracts awarded in mid-May of 1917. John Larson was the general contractor, and then Grams and Pete handled the heating and plumbing, and J.L. Turney was the electrical. And then about 16 days later was the groundbreaking for the new library. Well, something always manages to mess things up temporarily. And in the middle of excavating, in fact, they were just a few days into it, they found a skeleton in the excavation site. But they could never figure out if it was male, female, how long it had been there, what had happened to it. When they were looking at it, they figured the bones had been there for at least a good 20 years, so that would have put it back to about 1897. And at that time, nobody remembered any residences being built on that property, and the city had used it for a long time just as a lot to park machinery. So they're just not sure where this body came from. And I did do some checking in the paper, and I went clear through 1917 to see if there was any additional mention of this CSI find. And nothing was mentioned, so my guess is that the bones were interred probably in Potter's Field, is my guess on that. Now, if you have a library, you need a librarian to run it. And Florence Davis of Grand Forks was hired as the first director, and then she worked out of the Hinckley building until the Carnegie Library was completed. She was born in Merrickville, Ontario, and she attended UND and the University of Wisconsin Library School. And then she left Bismarck Public in 1925 and became the librarian at the State Historical Society, and she worked there until she retired in 1949. Her monthly salary was a whopping $83.33, or basically $1,000 a year. And in so doing some of my research, a few librarians later, it jumped up to like $1,800 a year. So it was interesting.
Were they men?
It was women directors up until it was Irena Stadler was the last woman director before, and then the one right after her was a man. And then after that, it was men for a while. Now we're back to women. I mean, I'm not trying to, but it's just interesting to look, you know, and a lot of the women were single. They were only here for a couple years. They met somebody, got married, and left. They preferred the women be single because a married woman should be home with her family, so that was the idea of the day. Okay, the Carnegie Library was moved right along. The construction went very, very quickly, and it was completed in late 1917. And it basically was an adaptation of what is known as the colonial style. It was bright red Hebron brick and white Bedford stone trim, and then the mortar was white. And people tell me that it was a very striking building in its day. And if you go up to our lobby display, during the excavation, why all these things come up during excavations, I don't know. But somebody found a Hebron brick in the dirt that was dug up for the new parking ramp there. And it said Hebron on it. But with all the years of being underground and in the dirt and stuff, it wasn't really bright red anymore. It's more of a gray. but there was no other building there that had Hebron brick. So it's the library brick, and you'll find it in the display area in the lobby. But yeah, Hebron brick, it was very striking. People were so proud of it. The interior was light tones, mahogany chairs and tables, a special cork carpet so that it would be quiet. Very high ceilings, and then it had little alcoves for study and for reading. And then the basement area had offices, and the community room, and the janitor's area, and then the mechanical area. And entrances were off of Thayer. And then there was another one tucked right around here that from 6th Street that would just take people right down to the community room. So it was nice for after-hours events and things like that. And then we're just going to browse through some pictures of the Carnegie Library. So most of these are going to be from the late 40s, early 50s. This would have been the children's area, and I believe that would have been downstairs, I think, because eventually, and I'll talk about that later, they made a move to put that downstairs instead of having it upstairs. And there was a funny story, too, with regards to expenses. The library board was meeting, and they were questioning how come the coal expense was so high. Well, it was a cold winter, winter 1918 to 1919. And so the librarian thought, well, maybe we can save money by closing the library on Sunday. And the library board wasn't too enthusiastic about that because they felt the library was far too busy to be closed. And she said, well, I can't be here 7 days a week. So their idea was to have the custodian come in and work Sundays. I'm sure the custodian was very happy about that. I went through more board minutes after that, and I really didn't find out how they resolved that situation. And the early library hours that Mrs. Davis posted, 3 to 6:30 and 7:30 to 9, all weekdays. And then on Sundays until May 1st, it was 3 to 5:30. And then the children's room was open all weekdays, but it was closed in the evenings and weekends. Keep in mind that in the early years, too, of the Carnegie Library, the only staff was the librarian and a custodian. That was it. She had no help. So there would be no way they could do the hours that we have now back then. And it was soon discovered, too, that having the adult and children's services and materials all combined on one floor wasn't really working very well. The story has it that the place would get so busy with children that the adults didn't have any space. And so Mrs. Davis asked the board for permission to close the community room down as a public meeting spot and then move all the children's material to that room and then expand the adult area to include the whole main floor. And they gave permission for that. She also managed to get an assistant to handle the children's area, and that person was paid $30 a month. And as I've said, Davis left the library in 1925, and she was followed by Pauline Rich, Helen Kennedy. Both those ladies came from Montana. Alice Ruth King came to us from South Dakota. Ellen Lawin from Washington State. Urena Stadler was, I believe, in Wisconsin. And then Robert Thomas came to us from Wisconsin as well. And Andrew Hansen had just gotten out of the service, I believe, and he came to us from that. Now, Urena Stadler, she was, up to that time, she was the longest serving library director. She'd been there, about just under 12 years, about 11, 12 years. So up to that time, she'd been the one person who had stayed there the longest. And she was really ahead of her time with programming. She firmly believed in having programs and displays and books and book talks on the issues of the day. She had a regular column in the newspaper, you know, not only just highlighting all the new books, but discussing books on certain topics and what books we had on those topics. So she was really, I think, ahead of her time on that. And what's interesting too is after she left us, she went to Minnesota. She was the president of the Minnesota Library Association. She also was the Minnesota Librarian of the Year. And when she was in North Dakota, she was also the North Dakota Library Association president. So she was very passionate about her profession, and she was rewarded for that with many accolades. And then Thomas, you remember the circulating art prints that we have upstairs? He started that. So that was his legacy to us. And then he also laid the groundwork for a citywide bookmobile. And the bookmobile was ordered, and it arrived after he had left, but before his replacement, Andrew Hansen, got here. And I'll talk more about the bookmobile history. That in itself is very interesting. And then when Andrew Hansen got here, it wasn't long before he saw that the community was growing and the library was getting small. It couldn't fill the needs of the growing community. And so they began efforts to find funding and a location for a brand new library for the city. And when I was reading the minutes, it became very clear very quickly that it was very important for Nod Hansen and the library board to keep it in a downtown location. They didn't want it on the outskirts. They wanted it in the middle of everything. And so they did look at several locations, and the one they chose was the 6th Street Avenue A spot. And at the time, the Quain home was on the site, and that was moved in May of '62 to the 2100 block of Rosser, on the south side of the 2100 block as you're driving east on Rosser. And right now, the last time I drove by it, I saw a sign, a real estate sign, so I believe the complex is up for sale. But what happened, it was moved to that location and then converted into apartments. And the bids were opened in August of '62, and Fraisley and Sons, Welsh and Sons, and Dakota Appliance got the general, the mechanical, and the electrical contracts for that new building. And it was completed in '63 with $240,000 that they got from what was called the Veterans Memorial Levy. And that was managed by the veterans organizations, and it was in honor of the World War II and Korean War veterans. And I believe there was some other agencies in town that were vying for that money. One was a pool. The library won. We got the money. And our architectural firm was the Ritterbusch Brothers.
Can I just ask,
Yes.
in your research, did you uncover any information that they even considered expanding the Carnegie building, adding on to it?
I think they really couldn't because it was a little landlocked, because to the west of it was the fire department, police department buildings. Across the street was the courthouse, and I believe there were some buildings, some structures to the south as well. So I just kind of think it was very landlocked, and I think that may have been a big reason why they did not. And I love this picture. This is a famous picture of the Carnegie move. Despite what it shows, though, Andrew Hansen never got to actually work in the new building that he got to, or that he was able to bring to the community. By then, he had already accepted a new directorship in Iowa and had left before the move started in June of '63. And people were talking about who these guys were. So in the back left, we have Dwayne Seymour. Here is Jess Cooper. And then we all know Tom Mayer, and then Andrew Hansen. And you might ask, how did they go about moving all the books? Betty Mills, she tells wonderful stories. She said that a grocery store had loaned them tons and tons of carts, and there was a little parade going up and down 6th Street with carts of books. And that's how they moved, and there would be a line of empty carts going back and another line of full carts coming. And I bet that was quite the deal, and it went on all on a weekend. Yeah, this was, whoops, excuse me again here. This was the architectural rendering for the Veterans Memorial Library. And then these other pictures down at the bottom, those are more from the 70s, but they show a lot of what the building, interior of the building looked like. And that's how I remember it when I first started working here in 1985, because that building was here at that time. And then we have some more pictures again from the 70s, the infamous card catalog, which I don't miss at all. Not so much for looking things up, but I hated filing all the cards. You never caught up with that. And then the age of the turntable and records. That was a 70s thing, and kids studying. And I remember oh, yes?
There's no pictures of the upstairs where the magazines and periodicals and stuff.
Unfortunately, for some reason, the building was very camera shy. I don't know why. There just isn't a lot of stuff on the interior of the building.
Back in 63, 64, 65, I worked carrying stuff up and down those stairs.
Mm-hmm.
Just exhausted by the time the day was over.
Oh yeah, I know. I worked here and had to run up and down those stairs many times too. Yep, it was.
No, she did 85. I did 20 years before that.
Oh.
Yes.
But I remember the days working in the old Veterans Library and the way it was set up. There was 2 entrances into the library. One was on Avenue A, and then the other was on the north side of the building, feeding in from the parking lot. So on Sundays, we'd have to open both doors. I'm not kidding you when I say there would be standing room only on Sundays. It was just incredibly packed.
That's because Rita Johnson always gave all of her term paper assignments.
It was just, and that predated the internet and all that stuff. So, I mean, reference work was extremely labor intensive back in those days. But I remember those 2 doors opening, and of course there would be hordes of people at either end. They'd all meet in the center and then flood right to the information desk. Don't ask me the number of times I kind of wanted to maybe hide. I figured it was safer to hide. I couldn't run that fast. But it was just extremely, extremely busy in those days. And again, you know, that was indicative of the needs of the community having overtaken the space at the library. And the Hansen, when he left us, we got Richard Miller and then Richard Wolfert. And he was with us until October of '69 when he was appointed the North Dakota State Librarian. And he held that position, I believe, until the early '80s. And then James Derteen came to us from South Dakota, and he was with us for a number of years. And then Tom Jones arrived on the scene in November of '75. And he currently is the longest serving library director. He was here for almost 36 years. And bless his heart, he's the one that hired me. Thank you. And he too, as Andrew Hansen had seen, is that the city's needs had outpaced the library building and knew that something had to be done. When Derteen was here at that point, they also realized that the library needed to grow. And they were purchasing lots on the library block as they came up for sale so that they would have the land in place for when they would expand. And then in 1979, Jones and the library board started working on an expansion plan, an extremely detailed, methodical expansion plan. And in the end, the city sales tax was used as collateral for bonds. And those bonds were sold to fund a 70,000 square foot facility that included the 1963 building. Many people think that the building is entirely new, but it does incorporate the old Veterans Memorial Library. And if you go into the main part of the library, up to the information desk, and then you look up and to your right, you'll see what we call the mezzanine area. That point south was the old building. Everything north of that is the new building, and that took up the parking lot. Pretty much we have the whole city block now. And the bond was for $3.9 million, and the construction was done in several phases. The first phase was completed in 1989, and that was the main area, or the main part of the library. Meeting rooms came later, and that was phase 2. And the architect for both of those phases was Arnold Hansen. And then the lower level was completed in 97, and that would include the stack areas, the Missouri River room, the study rooms, that lower level area. Warren Vinge was the architect for that. And it was so fun living through that. It was an exciting time when the bond passed and we were able to start working on it. And then I remember when the hole got punched through the wall so we could start moving books over. I mean, it was an exciting time and it was a lot of hard work, but it was so, so worth it. And some of the other exciting things that happened, there was a coffee shop that was done. Oops. Yep, there was a coffee shop that was done, and that was funded by the Friends of the Library and the Library Foundation. We also got a loan from the city to help out with that, and that's been paid back. And then about a year later, it opened for business, and now it's run by the Matt and Sandy McMurdy, and it's known as the Gifted Bean Coffee Shop. And what was really cool is we were the first library in the state to have a coffee shop. So. And then the children's area was another wonderful expansion and renovation that we did. And what was so cool about that is that no tax dollars were used at all. It was all individual donations that totaled over $600,000. And then if you walk into that area, you'll notice the sky mural in the center. Rick Sprincenatic did that. And then the story room murals, a staff member, Gwen Riddenhauer, she did those. And then if you look around the ceiling, the panels just that border the ceiling area, those were done by Leon Baszler. So we had some gifted artists decorate the area for us as well. And it just appeals to children. And it's an extremely busy area too, which is good to see. Tom Jones retired in May 2011, after almost 36 years. His successors were Christy Harms, Mary Jane Schmaltz, and then Christine Quiavo, who's the current library director. One recent feather in our cap is our new teen center that's located in the northeast corner of the main floor, and that opened early this year. The Teen Advisory Committee played a big part in the design, the decorations. Their input was extremely valuable, and they worked along with youth services staff and the architect to create the space that they have. They gather there every day to study, meet with friends, play games, and just generally be creative in a very good way. It almost makes me want to go back to teen years, almost. Another thing we're very proud of, it was in a recent award that we received, was the North Dakota Star Library Award. And we received that from this North Dakota State Library. And we were compared to other libraries with similar size or similar expenditures and populations. We were number one in hours open to the public, program attendance, public computer use, and the number of library card holders. And then our outreach services also received accolades as number one for hours available to the public and the total number of stops annually. And that was something that we were so proud of. It was given out on the basis of circulation, Wi-Fi usage, and the percentage of Library Coordinating Council standards that we had met. And so we were very, very proud to get that award. Then our outreach services are just important because there's a big segment of the population where it's difficult to impossible for them to actually physically visit the library. And so the bookmobile helps those people, as does our new mobile library service that we have. The Burleigh County Bookmobile first started at the Carnegie Library in early 1957 as a citywide service. And then the time came where federal funding was kind of drying up because a lot of the money that funded the bookmobile and allowed it to serve the public was grant related, and a lot of that money dried up. And so Wolfert was the director at that time, and he had to make that tough decision that the service would be terminated. And the bookmobile, the first bookmobile that we had, was this little guy here. And that was sold to a private citizen for $900. And then when Tom Jones came, he and a group of very enthusiastic supporters, both city and county-wide, had a couple of campaigns going. One was to increase the mill levy from 4 mills to 6 mills. That would take care of the funding for the bookmobile, and it would no longer have to be dependent on those federal monies. The other campaign was a petition campaign. And at the time, the law had on the books that it didn't have to go before the voters. It just had to have a certain number of signed petition or signers on petitions to authorize the county commission to start service. Well, they succeeded in both areas. Not only did they get the increase in mill levy, they got the petitions that were needed, and the county commissioners authorized the service, and so that it began again. And technically, they had been temporarily operating on one of the last grant monies in 75, and that was in danger of drying up completely. So this victory came at a very appropriate time, and service could continue to the county area. And so that was a victory for the library and for the county as well. And then the bookmobile that took over was the Prairie Schooner. And then these are the 2 bookmobiles. They're actually the same vehicle, but the last one there was repainted, just repainted differently. So the last 2 pictures are actually the same vehicle. And then our current one that we have today. Our mobile library service started in December of last year, and it was to answer a need to allow the bookmobile to more fully concentrate on the county, because it had been making local stops as well. Now with the mobile library, we are able to allow the bookmobile to expand their county routes. And then the mobile library visits schools, has drops at schools. It visits the assisted living centers, and also Ruth Myers as well. It stops there too. And then other programming and services that we have are our computer classes. Of course, everyone knows the research assistants and the databases, helping people find that next great book to read, which is the questions I love very much. We have book clubs and discussion groups. We've got classes, crafting classes, and other adult coloring programs and other type of programs of interest to adults. The ever-popular electronic books and audiobooks that you can put on your Nook or your Kindle. We just recently had Comic-Con. In fact, that was a couple of weeks ago. And that was the first one we'd ever had. Now, for those of you that don't know what Comic-Con is, it technically is a comic book convention, but it's kind of evolved into a celebration of pop culture. People gather that are in love with sci-fi, fantasy, anime, and gaming, and it's just basically a geek fest, is what it is. And many of the people that came in costume as well. So we had from Star Wars, we had Princess Leia, and we had people dressed up from other sci-fi and anime characters. There was trivia, costume contest, and then we had a read poster photo booth. We had 1,100 people come to that event. It was amazing. I'm sure we will have another. And then we have a Lego club that's really popular with the kids, the teen gaming events. And then we have a special sensory story time for children in the autistic spectrum, as well as regular story times. We've got our very popular and busy meeting rooms and study rooms. We have 36 public access computers that are available for the general public free of charge. The only thing they pay for is printing if they do it. We also have a self-service faxing and photocopying station. And then either through the library or from the behest of the Friends, we have many sponsored music and author programs as well. So our library is just a busy, busy place, and this is just the top of the iceberg in terms of the programming that the library does. And then I thought it would be fun to share some of our current statistics with you. Every year we issue an annual report, and the 2016 full annual report should be coming out soon. But I talked her into giving me a few of the statistics today. We have almost 42,000 card holders at the library. Last year we had almost 386,000 visits, meaning people coming into the library. We have close to 190,000 items in our collection, and of those, almost 473,000 items were checked out. We have 50 databases, most of which you can access from home as well as in the building. At the information desk, we answered almost 37,000 questions. We have 16 full-time and 43 part-time staff. And including the bookmobile, we are open 5,772 hours. And then as far as teen events, we had 40 teen events where almost 300 teens attended. And then we had 179 adult events, and close to 10,000 people attended those. And then our outreach service Snapshots, the bookmobile, has about 4,200 card holders, and they had almost 13,000 visitors to the bookmobile. They've got almost 22,000 items and over 50,000 checkouts last year. Close to 10,000 visits, and that means them going to locations. And they have 77 regular locations, and their total stops for the year was close to 800 stops. And the mobile library statistics are a little low because they just got started. But so far this year, at their lobby stops, they've served over 120 people that come, and that means somebody picking up books, returning books, asking questions, anybody that came physically to the mobile library that they served. And then they have 12 drop stops, which basically means they have bags of books that they just drop off and then they leave. And from the library's humble beginnings to the present, there's always been kind of a common thread, and I saw that when I was reading the articles, and I saw that when I was reading the minutes and talking to people. It was the desire of the citizens to have and to keep and to build and to maintain a library. And then behind that, there was always dedicated staff, even if it was just the lonely librarian that worked tirelessly to keep the services relevant to the community, like the Arena Stadlers of the library. And I'm very excited to see what's going to happen for the next 100 years. Thank you very much.